Welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chel Kvav, and we'll be learning today Mi'etz Hashem Daf Kuf Chav Zayin Amid Beis. One short little siman here. Siman Taf Reish Nun Hey. The siman does not even have a title. Uboy Sif Echad. We have one sif. Says the Mechaber, Goy Shehevi Lulav LiYisrael Michutz Latchum. If a Nachri, a non-Jew, brings the Daled Minim to a Yid from outside of the Tchum. So we know there's a din d'Rabbanan that you're not allowed to go outside of the Tchum of the city on Shabbos or Yom Tov. You're not allowed to go more than 2,000 amos outside the city limits. Now it's Yom Tov, and they don't have a lulav. They don't have an esrik. They don't have daled minim. So a non-Jew brought daled minim from outside of the Tchum into the city. Now that means a couple of things. First of all, the non-Jew performed Meleches Isser. He did a forbidden malacha. He traveled from outside of the Tchum into the city, and he did it in order to bring Daled Minim to a Yid. So he did Meleches Isser, and he did it for the benefit of a non-Jew. Now, again, the Isser of coming from outside of the Tchum is an Isser d'Rabbanan. Now, normally, when a non-Jew if he performs Meleches Isser for a Yid, it depends what kind of Meleches Isser it was. If he did a malacha that was a daraisa, if he performed an Isser daraisa, then nobody is allowed to benefit from the malacha that he did. So if a non-Jew performs a malacha daraisa, and he does it on behalf of a Yid, then no one is allowed to derive benefit from the malacha that the non-Jew performed. If the non-Jew performs a malacha d'Rabbanan, then the Yid that he did it for is not allowed to be nene. He's not allowed to derive benefit from the malacha, but other Yidden are. So over here, we have a non-Jew who did malacha d'Rabbanan. He brought daled minim from outside of the Tchum to the city. He did it ostensibly for a Yid, so that a Yid should be able to be mekayim the mitzvah of daled minim. Says the Mechaber, Goy shehevi lulav LiYisrael michutz l'tchum. He brought a lulav or the other daled minim to a Yid from outside of the Tchum. Muter litloi. You're allowed to take those daled minim to be yotze the mitzvah. Afilu mi shehuva b'shviloi. And this is true whether for the Yid who the non-Jew did it for or any other Yid. They're all allowed to use those daled minim in order to be yotze the mitzvah. What is the reason for this? Well, what it boils down to is the rule that we've already learned many times, and that is mitzvahs lav lehanois nitnu. When you perform a mitzvah, we don't see that as a hana. We don't see that you derived benefit from the malacha. Mitzvahs lav lehanois nitnu. The Rabbeinu Shalom didn't give you a mitzvah aseh for your benefit. So when you perform a mitzvah, that's not your benefit. You're doing avodas habayre. That's what you're doing. But it's not a hana. It's not your benefit. And therefore, yes, it's true, the non-Jew did a meleches isser. He did an isser d'Rabbanan. And normally, the one who he did it for would not be allowed to have hana from that. But over here, this does not constitute a hana, the fact that you're being yotze the mitzvah. Okay, so that seems pretty straightforward. Now, we have a little bit of a cryptic Ramah. The Ramah says, Haggah, v'ayin le'el siman tavkuf peivav sifchaf aleph. Take a look, Hilchas Rosh Hashanah, siman tavkuf peivav sifchaf aleph, v'chaf beis, and sifchaf beis, v'siman shin zayin, and look at Hilchas Shabbos in siman shin zayin sif hey, im mutter loymar loyvet kechavam leilech acharav le'chal yom tov b'shviloi. To analyze the question of whether or not you're allowed to do this lechatchila. You see, what the Mechaber says is, the non-Jew brought the daled minim from outside of the Tchum. Well, how about if he didn't bring it? You don't have daled minim, so you want to send him. Are you allowed to go ahead and send the non-Jew out of the Tchum to go pick up daled minim? So the Ramah doesn't answer the question. The Ramah says, well, in order to analyze that question, he gives you Mara Mekomis. Tav Kuf Pei Vav Sif Chaf Aleph and Sif Chaf Beis Shin Zayin Sif Hey. Okay, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Aleph Mutter Litloi. You're allowed to go ahead and use these daled minim that the non-Jew brought from outside of the Tchum. You're allowed to use them to be Yotze the Mitzvah, says the Chavetz Chaim. When we call Mokim, nevertheless, while it's true that you're allowed to use them, Aser L'taltaloi Chutz La'arba Amos, you do still have a problem. Let's talk about a normal, so to speak, city, a city that's not walled, and a city that doesn't have an Erev. So a non-Jew brought a set of daled minim from outside of the Tchum. He brought it to the city, and he deposited it somewhere. He puts it down by a table outside the shul. Now, the halacha is, since these daled minim came from outside of the Tchum, doesn't matter if it's daled minim or anything else, any chayfetz that comes from outside of the Tchum into the city or to wherever, somebody took something from outside of its Tchum and took it out of the Tchum and then puts it down, that item is not allowed to be transported more than daled amos from where it is. It now is available for use within a 4 amma radius. That's where it could be used. You can't take it out of its 4 amas. Why? Because at the beginning of Shabbos or at the beginning of Yom Tov, it was kind of shvisa. Its place was where it was when Shabbos started. And it had a tchum. It had a tchum. It was able to be transported in a circle of 2,000 amas. If it was inside of the city, it was able to be transported throughout the city and 2,000 amas outside of the city. But the daled minim at the outset of Shabbos or Yom Tov had a tchum. Now you took it out of the tchum. The non-Jew took it out of the tchum. Once it goes out of the tchum, it is now restricted. It can only be moved within the daled amos of where it's put down outside of the tchum. So here we have a set of daled minim that came from outside of the tchum. Yes, if you go over to the daled minim and you pick them up and you make a bracha, you could be yotze the mitzvah, but you can't move it outside of its daled amos. When we call Malkam also l'taltal l'chutz la'arba amos im ha'ir ein ba erev. If we're talking about a city that doesn't have an erev. What if we're talking about a city that does have an erev? So the Mishnah Berurah gets to that at the end, a little bit further on. And what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say is, if the daled minim were taken outside of the tchum, from outside of the tchum, if the daled minim were taken from one place and brought outside of the tchum, but brought into a city, let's say, that's walled in, so it's within an erev, then the entire area that's surrounded by the erev is considered daled amos. And now the daled minim can be transported anywhere in the city. But the Mishnah Berurah started off here talking about a city that does not have an erev, and therefore the daled minim were restricted for use within their daled amos. And therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, v'tzarech leilech lamakom she'eniach shama akum v'litloi sham. If you want to use these daled minim to be yotze the mitzvah, you have to go to the daled minim and you have to use them where they are. You can't bring them to your house or to your shul. But ubayis, let's say the non-Jew brought the daled minim and he put them in a house. Ubayis, afilu gadol, even if it's a mansion, nechshav karba amos, the entire house constitutes 1 daled amos, and you could move it anywhere in the house. Ubishvil zaken or chayla she'enon yichaylan leilech. Let's say the daled minim were brought to the city from outside of the tchum, and now you have a zaken, an elderly person, or a chayla, an ill individual, who can't come to the daled minim to take them. Yomer la'akum leilech etzlam. You could ask the non-Jew to bring it to them, because this would be a shvus b'makom mitzvah. This is 1 d'Rabbanan, is the amir la'akum. You're instructing the non-Jew to do malacha, and what are you asking him to do? You're asking him to move daled minim that came from outside of the tchum, outside of their arba amos. That's also an issa d'Rabbanan. So that's a double d'Rabbanan. It's a shvus d'shvus, and it's b'makom mitzvah. You're doing it in order to facilitate somebody being mekayim a mitzvah, and the default psak is shvus d'shvus b'makom mitzvah, amir la'akum. The shvus d'shvus b'makom mitzvah is mutter. Avalum yesham erev, but If the daled minim were brought to a city that has an erev, yakal taltaloi b'chol ir, then you could move the daled minim anywhere in the city. It's the same halacha as if the non-Jew put down a daled minim inside a house. Inside a house, inside a city that has an erev, it's all considered one daled amos. Rak chusla vakam erev and a rashoy taltaloi, but you would not be allowed to take it, obviously, outside of the erev. Ice cut and base. The Mechaber said that these daled minim could be used by anybody to be mekayim the mitzvah, even the one that it was the yid that it was brought for. Furthermore, says the Chavetz Chaim, bein b'yom tov rishon. This is true whether it's the first day of Yom Tov when the mitzvah of daled minim is a daraisa, or bein b'yom tov sheni, or it's the second day and on when it's the chiv d'Rabbanan. Va'afilu babet tzivuyai, and even if the yid told him specifically to bring it from outside of the erev. Now, finally, we get to this lengthy Mishnah Berurah that goes on the Ramah. So the Ramah's question was, all right, are you allowed to do this lechatchila? Lechatchila on Yom Tov. The Mechaber writes this in a manner of b'diavad. Goy shehevi, a non-Jew who brought daled minim from outside of the Tchum. But are you allowed to instruct a non-Jew to go outside of the Tchum and bring daled minim from outside of the Tchum? Says the Mishnah Berurah Cut and Gimel. This is the quote from the Ramah, the Marmakaimus of the Ramah. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, Hainu, what the Ramah is saying is, the Siman Shin Zayin, and El Shabbos and Siman Shin Zayin, Mevi HaMechaber Gam Dasa Oiser Shvus Tishvus B'Makam Mitzvah. If you take a look at Siman Shin Zayin, over there, the Mechaber brought a machlokes on this halacha. Shvus Tishvus B'Makam Mitzvah, is it mutter or is it aser? And over there, the Mechaber brought a machlokes Rishonim. Achein, however, B'Siman Tavkuf Pevav Sifchaf Aleph, in Hilchas Rosh Hashanah, we were speaking about a shofar. What happens if there's a shofar that's up in a tree on Rosh Hashanah? So you want to ask a non-Jew to go climb up into the tree and bring down the shofar, so you should be able to be mekayim the mitzvah of shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Over there, the Mechaber writes that that's mutter, because it's a shvus b'makam mitzvah. You're doing amira la'akum, you're instructing a non-Jew to perform meleches iser, that's a derabanan. And what's the meleches iser that you're instructing him to do? You're instructing him to climb a tree. That's also a derabanan. So that's a shvus b'makam mitzvah, and the Mechaber writes that that's mutter, and he doesn't bring down a dissenting opinion. So in Siman Shin Zayin, the Mechaber brings down two different opinions. One opinion, shvus b'makam mitzvah is aser. One opinion, shvus b'makam mitzvah is mutter. But in Tuf Kuf Pei, Vav, the Mechaber does not bring down two opinions. He only says shvus b'makam mitzvah is mutter. So therefore, Sasam lahakal bazeh v'leihevi klal dasa oiser. He doesn't bring down the dissenting opinion who forbids it at all. Well, Afizan, for that reason, since we see that the Mechaber did that, it seems that in Tavkuf Pevav, the Mechaber was machriya, and he decided, like the opinion, shvus b'makam mitzvah is mutter. Af lechatchila. It's mutter lechatchila, lefizeh. Mutter af lechatchila, loyman lenachri b'yom tov. It's mutter even lechatchila, to ask a non-Jew on Yom Tov, lahavi lulav michutz latchum, to go fetch daled minim from outside of the tchum and be over in Issa D'Rabbanan, do meleches Issa D'Rabbanan, and bring the daled minim back to the city so that we could go ahead and be mekayim the mitzvah. And this, now you'll ask me a question, if what the Chavetz Chaim is saying is true, so why did the Mechaber Taka write this in a Lashon Di'evet? Why did he say it even lechatchila? So the Chavetz Chaim gives an explanation. Hainu, the bazeh muter afilu hevi michutz latchom shel shneim asar mil. What the Mechaber was trying to cover a different case. We assume that the Isser of Tchum, the prohibition to bring something from 2,000 amos outside the city, we assume lahalacha that that's only an Isser D'Rabbanan. But then there's another Tchum. There's a Tchum of shneim asar mil. 12 mil. A mil is 2,000 amos. 12 mil is 24,000 amos. The tchum of shneim asar mil, many Rishonim hold is in Issa D'Oraisa. So what the Mechaber was saying was, in a dieved, Goy shehevi lulav liyisrael michutz l'tchum. If the non-Jew brought the daled minim from outside of the tchum, meaning even from outside of the tchum of shneim asar mil, which according to many Rishonim is a daraisa, you could go ahead and you could use it and you could be yotze the mitzvah. Delakama paiskabu is a daraisa liyisrael. Even though many Rishonim hold that the tchum of shneim asar mil is a daraisa, ve'im kein asar lechatchila lo'im la'akam lahavi afilu b'makam mitzvah. So in that case, if you're dealing with the tchum of shtei masar mil, it's not mutter b'di'evid. It's not mutter lechatchila. I'm sorry. In the case of shtei masar mil, it's not mutter lechatchila, because to instruct a non-Jew to bring something from outside of shnei masar mil, 24,000 amas, you're instructing him to be over a daraisa. That's not a shvus to shvus. That's a single darabanan. It's amir la'akom, which is a darabanan on an issa daraisa. So that's not mutter lechatchila. That's only mutter b'di'evid. B'kamokim kevich kfar hevi b'di'evid. If you already brought it from outside shnei masar mil, mutter litloi v'lotzeis by. We're going to let you take it b'yotze the mitzvah. V'hainu afilu l'mishu huva b'shviloi. Even for the one that he brought it for, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna be soimach. We're gonna say, okay, he b'di'evid. You didn't command him to do it. He did it on his own, and he brought it from outside shtem asar mil. We'll let you be yotze the mitzvah. V'atam, and the reason is the kevim de betiltel mutter lakoil. These daled minim, are they muktzah? They're not muktzah. There's no din of muktzah on these daled minim. Memelo mutter gam lotzeis by. We'll let you use it to be yotze the mitzvah. D'lo yaser ela lehanais mimenu, because the only reason that they would be aser is there would be aser bahana, since the non-Jew did a maleches isser to bring them. So now a yid is not allowed to benefit from it. But a mitzvah lo mikri hana. But like we said earlier, mitzvah slav lehanis nitnu. This is not a hana. So again, when the mechaber uses a lashon di'eved, when the mechaber says goy shehevi, he's talking about a case where the non-Jew brought it from outside the tchum of shnei masar mil. In that case, the non-Jew brought the daled minim from outside shnei masar mil. He did a maleches iser daraisa. So even though he did malacha daraisa, since it's here already, you're allowed to go use it. Even the one who the non-Jew did it for is allowed to use the daled minim to be yotze the mitzvah, because mitzvah slav lehanos nitnu. But in that case, you can't send him lechatchila, because to send him lechatchila would be amir la'akam on a daraisa. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, in a really pressing circumstance, she'ein motzi be'ir lulav acher lotzeis by, where there simply is not another set of daled minim in the city that could be used for the mitzvah, hiskimu achrayim, the achrayim reached the conclusion to yesh lahakel loyma la'akam lahavi afilu chutz l'shnei masar mil kedei l'kayim ha'mitzvah hasei delulav. Says the Chavetz Chaim, in a real shasat chak, where there simply is no set of daled minim located in the city, we will be soimach on the shitas that hold that the tchum of shnei masar mil is also a derabanan, and you could send a non-Jew outside of the tchum to go bring daled minim in order to be yotze the mitzvah. V'hinei kol zeh dafke b'yuchal lachzor bo b'yoyim v'yikayim mitzvah tekef. However, with a caveat, says the Chavetz Chaim, that's only true if the non-Jew is going to be able to go outside of the tchum, get the daled minim, and come back while it's still the first day of Yom Tov, so that you could be mekayim the mitzvah say daraisa of daled minim. If it's a real shasat chak and you have no daled minim in the city, and it's the first day of Yom Tov, so the chiyuv of daled minim is a daraisa, and you could send a non-Jew outside of the tchum, and he has enough time to go and come back and bring the daled minim so that you could be yotze the mitzvah daraisa, then we'll be saimach on the shita that the tchum of shnei masar mil is only a derabanan, and it's a shvus b'makam mitzvah, and we'll let you do that. But if you want to send him, you want to send the non-Jew on the first day of Yom Tov, sheyavai b'Yom Tov sheni, so that he should be able to return on the second day of Yom Tov, and now you're only going to be mekayim the mitzvah derabanan on the second day, also l'sholchai chutz l'shnei masar mil, then you're not allowed to send him outside of Shneim Asa Mil. And the Sharetzianus Cotton Gimel says why. He says, Kevin de B'yamtiv Sheni Hu Rak Mitzvah D'Rabbanan. Since the chiyuv of Daled Minim on the second day and on is only a chiyuv D'Rabbanan. V'chutz l'Shneim Asa Mil Kama Rishonim U'isa D'Araisa L'Yisrael. And the tchum of Shneim Asa Mil, according to many Rishonim, is an Issa D'Araisa. V'shaych Bazeh Amir La'akam Shvus. So if you do Amir La'akam on it, it's only a single Shvus. It's Mamash Issa D'Rabbanan. It's better that you should miss being Mekayim the mitzvah of Daled Minim on the second day Yom Tov, Sheva al Taisa. You're doing it passively. Passively, you're going to miss being Mekayim the mitzvah. It's better to do that. It's better to do that than to actively go ahead and risk being over the Rabbanan of Amir La'akam on a Daraisa to tell the non-Jew to go outside of the Tchum of Shneim Asa Mil to go get the Daled Minim. Okay, now we continue in this Mishnah Berurah, in the middle of a line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. And furthermore, you should know, says the Chavetz Chaim, the dafka b'mechutz l'tchum she'ein alav iser tiltel v'chanal. This discussion is only when we're talking about Daled Minim that came from outside of the Tchum, where there's no shail of muktzah. The whole question over here is, we're dealing with Daled Minim that were brought by a non-Jew. A non-Jew did Meleches Isser. He brought Daled Minim from outside of the Tchum. And also there's a shaila on these Daled Minim. They came from outside of the Tchum. Could you move them throughout the city? Do they only have Daled Amas? But there's no shaila of muktzah. There's no problem of muktzah with these Daled Minim. Aval, however, arava shenitlisha b'yomtiv. Let's say a non-Jew went ahead and harvested aravas on Yom Tov. Afilu shaloi b'shvil Yisrael. Even if he didn't do it for a yid, there's a non-Jew who has a willow field, and he went ahead and he harvested aravas on Yom Tov. Bein b'yom tov rishon ubein b'yom tov sheni asel ataltala. Those are muktzah. They cannot be moved. Not on Yom Tov Rishon, not on Yom Tov Sheni. Afilu ein le'acheres latzeispa. Even if you don't have any other aravas, the muktzah, because these aravas are muktzah. The halacha is vegetation, an arava branch, something that's attached to the ground at the outset of Yom Tov. Even if it's harvested on Yom Tov, it remains muktzah for the entire day. Since it was attached to the ground at the outset of Yom Tov at Ben Hashmashas, it was a muktzah arava at the outset of Yom Tov because it was attached to the ground. Now that it's harvested on Yom Tov, even though it was harvested by a non-Jew and he didn't even do it for a yid, it doesn't matter. It retains its muktzah status for the entire day. And that arava is not available for use even on Yom Tov Rishon when the chiyuv of Daled Minim is a daraisa, and even though you have no other aravas to be mekayim the mitzvah with. Because to move that arava would be an Issa D'Rabbanan. You're not allowed to be over an Issa D'Rabbanan b'yadayim in order to be mekayim a mitzvah. Can't do that. Even b'malka mitzvah, the muktzah, the shvos afilu b'malka mitzvah asru. Achein, however, im nitlisha b'yom tov rishon, let's say the non-Jew harvested the arava on the first day of Yom Tov, muteris b'sheni. It would be mutter on the second day of Yom Tov, because it retains its muktzah status for the entire first day of Yom Tov. But now on the second day of Yom Tov, it's no longer muktzah. This is a funny phrase over here in the Mishnah Berurah that stumped me for a few minutes. This is true, says the Chavetz Chaim. If the arava was harvested on the first day, you can't use it on the first day because it's muktzah. But on the second day, it loses its status of muktzah, and now it's available for use. Imloi, with an exception. Imloi kishachal Yom Tov Rishon b'Shabbos, unless the first day of Yom Tov was on Shabbos. So if the first day of Yom Tov was on Shabbos and Sunday is the second day of Yom Tov, then this doesn't apply. Normally, if it was harvested on the first day of Yom Tov, it's mutter on the second day of Yom Tov. Not so if the first day of Yom Tov is Shabbos and the second day of Yom Tov is Sunday. Imloi kishachal Yom Tov Rishon b'Shabbos. Da'az aser lotzei spoi, and I expected to read Gam b'yom sheni. If the first day of Yom Tov is Shabbos and the second day of Yom Tov is Sunday, then not only can you not use the arava that was harvested on Shabbos, you can't use it on Sunday either. Now, Sunday is Yom Sheni of Yom Tov. So I expected to read Im loy kishachal yom tov rishon b'Shabbos, the oz also losis by gam b'yom rishon yom sheni, even on the second day of Yom Tov. But it says gam b'yom rishon. You know why? Because Yom Rishon over here doesn't mean the first day of Yom Tov; it means Sunday. Yom Rishon, first day of the week. The reason why, if the first day of Yom Tov is Shabbos and the second day of Yom Tov is Sunday, even if if the guy harvested the arava on Shabbos, it remains usher on Sunday, is because of the din of Beis Shanol, Beis Shanol to be Yom Tov. Beis Shanol on Shabbos is usher on the second day of Yom Tov on Sunday. So to over here, this arava was muchan for use, the hachana of this arava. What's the hachana of the arava for use? The guy harvested it. So the hachana was done on Shabbos. Now you're not allowed to use it on Yom Tov because ein Shabbos meichin li Yom Tov. Finally, the Mishnah Berurah gives an interesting case here. Ve'im ein lechavera lulav. Let's say somebody knows that his friend does not have daled minim. V'hu chutz latchum. I know I'm in this city. I have daled minim. I know that Yankel, my friend, is in another place outside of my tchum, and I know that he doesn't have daled minim. So I want to go over to Tony, the non-Jew here in my city, go take my daled minim and bring them to my friend Yankel outside of the tchum. So now I'm lichatchila sending a non-Jew outside of the tchum, but I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for somebody else. I'm doing it for Yankel, so that Yankel should be able to be Mekayim, the mitzvah say, which makes sense because there's a din of arvus. My friend has a chiyuv to be Mekayim the mitzvah of daled minim. There's a din arvus. I have a chiyuv to help him be yotzei the mitzvah. So then the Chavetz Chaim says an interesting halacha, and he goes through this at length in the Sharitzia to explain it. I'm not going to go through it now. He says, if you know that the reason your friend Yankel outside of the tchum doesn't have daled minim is because he simply didn't have the money to be able to get daled minim. It's not a pshia. He wasn't able to get daled minim. Then mutar lo zeh l'sholchai. Then you're allowed to go send a non-Jew to bring it to him. But if he was able to get upasha and he was negligent for lo yikna and he didn't get himself daled amas, then you don't go ahead and say that you should do amir la'akum in order to provide him with the ability to be mekayim a mitzvah. If he was pesheya, if he didn't see to it that he should be able to do what he needs to do, then you don't go ahead and do amir la'akum in order to facilitate his kiyam mitzvahs. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The schools of Liman HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Ram Shor said, Yeshua is the first parnasa should took him to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the Biyas Gal Tzedek from Herav Yameinu Amen. Be well.